welcome everyone to my review of the new IDLES album Ultra Mono. But before I begin, just in case you've been living under a rock for the last 3 years, IDLES are a punk rock 5-piece from Bristol whose previous 2 albums have garnered critical and commercial success, possibly even making them one of the fastest rising bands from the UK. Across both records you'll find incredibly muscular and tight performances, infectious hooks and a real sense of urgency in almost every track. However, despite all these positives, the absolute showstopper is Joe's vocals. They consistently sound gritty and rough without ever going so far as to not fit the aggressive but melodic punk IDLES are striving for. He is forever charismatic and full of personality, giving the band such a distinct feel, and then there are the lyrics. The lyrics across both records have been incredibly entertaining. Joe is a very passionate person and is certainly not afraid to share his beliefs, be it personal or political. As a result, both records are packed with references to politicians, absurd imagery, and of course, brilliant one-liners. In fact, towards the end of last year, I was lucky enough to catch them play a massive 20-song set at Alexandra Palace, and the fact that there were almost no duds in the setlist is an absolute testament to all the positives of this band. So of course, this all leads us to Ultra Mono. The whole thing kicks off with the absolutely explosive War, which might be one of the most bombastic songs IDLES has ever written. The song opens with a muscular drum and bass riff before brittle guitars are laid over top. The whole thing goes back and forth between just drums with some very onomatopoeic, cartoonish vocals, and some of the fullest blasts of noise the band have ever put together, before it all comes together to create a siren-assisted wall of sound to close the track out. It's one of the most blood-pumping openings I've heard to a record all year, plus I feel like I have to mention the snare roll in the middle of the track. It's incredibly clean, powerful, and fast, so it almost sounds like it was mechanical. Interestingly, the very next track changes the tone a fair bit. Most records I feel would try to keep up the intensity and pace, but instead here we get Grounds, an almost sludgy track that evokes some kind of strangely playful no-wave almost. I really enjoy the sparseness in this instrumentation, allowing Joe's vocals to come forward and really take centre, almost like on a hip-hop song. Plus the line, "You will not catch me staring at the sun," is hilarious because I read it as comparing literally staring at the sun to being as damaging as reading The Sun, a famously sensationalist and inflammatory newspaper. And while this track isn't one of my highlights amongst the track listing, I am really glad that they decided to put this little experiment here, because ultimately IDLES do play a very straightforward punk rock. Speaking of which, the very next track is one of the most anthemic, straight-up punk rock songs IDLES has ever put together. The pace of the track perfectly fits the tone it's trying to strike, which is one of a motivational video or a speaker. I adore the hook on this track as well. Not only does it sound huge, but I never knew quite how much I needed Joe telling me that I can do it. Plus the line, "Let's seize the day, all hold hands, chase the pricks away," is such a simple but perfect encapsulation of the song and IDLES' message as a band. This song also starts rolling out some pretty hilarious and unique imagery, a personal favourite line being like Kathleen Hanna with bare claws grabbing Trump by the pussy. But honestly, you could pull almost any line from this track and it would be chuckle worthy. The next song, Anxiety, is another personal highlight for me in the IDLES back catalogue. Instrumentally, it's nothing super unique, but I feel like the way the song layers itself and plays around with progression just goes to show why IDLES are so much better than most of the other bands in this genre. Not only that, but the ending is pretty explosive, and I also really enjoy the lyrical theme here. Unfortunately, the middle of the record does waver ever so slightly, mostly due to the next 3 tracks being pretty heavily reliant on a single guitar riff. This becomes especially apparent because I feel like Kill Them With Kindness and Ne touchez pas moi both felt a touch underwritten for my tastes. Having said that, I do like the sentiment of Je touche pas moi, God I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I also appreciate Jenny Beth's excellent vocal contributions. Also, Kill Them With Kindness has one of the most manic vocal performances across the record. The star of the middle portion for me, however, is Model Village, a pretty hilarious song ripping into those idyllic middle-class suburban areas, highlighting some of the typical issues within those areas, while also comparing it to a literal model village. Fortunately, the record's back end recovers this slight dip with an outrageous run of songs. Carcinogenic is another pacey punk rock anthem driven mostly by an excellent bass riff. The whole thing really lets the rhythm section lead and the guitars just follow and sort of build on them where appropriate. Not only that, but the lyrics do a great job of jabbing at our standard 9 to 5 lives. I also love the chorus flipping the term "you only live once" into "you only die once." It's another example of a small yet simple, effective hook. Brains, interestingly enough, almost feels like a sequel to Divide and Conquer from Brutalism, in that the song is mostly about building tension using repetition, which had me a little worried on first listen because honestly I think Divide and Conquer is one of the weaker IDLES track overall, but upon repeated listens it's clear how much more dynamic and explosive this song is, especially with how excellent the ending is. To be honest, I actually slightly wish this song was the final song on the album. The Lover is a pretty hilarious and shockingly well done haters anthem. The rhythm is pretty unique and juttery compared to the rest of the album, and really feels like a grandiose statement that fits appropriately with the end of the album, making it feel more like a closing statement than just another track, which I really felt was appropriate. Not only do I love the hi-hats paired with the shots of guitar noise, but also the level of sass coming in from Joe. Not to mention, it's another track with an extremely well-built, explosive ending. Now, here I have a slight confession to make. I've never really been the biggest fan of IDLES' slow songs, and while A Hymn is probably one of the best so far, I still can't really say it's a highlight in the track listing for me. I like the lyrical theme, painting an image of a person floating through place to place, but ultimately feeling a level of loneliness, and I'm glad this one progresses more than June or Slow Savage. I will say it does serve its purpose quite nicely, in that it helps highlight the final cut Donkey, which continues the grandiose feel of The Lover, but amps it up somewhat to fill the role of album closer very appropriately. Danke in German means thank you, and the song's lyrics are exclusively about supporting the people around you. It's the perfect sentiment to close the record out on, and the instrumentation on this track feels like a total jam. The whole thing is pretty pacey, but builds very effectively. Initially, I felt like the song cut itself off a little too quickly, but the more I've listened to it and the more I've gotten used to where it chooses to close, the more I've enjoyed the song overall, even if I do think it probably could have been improved if the final climax was drawn out just a tad longer. Overall, the album has a slightly more heavy and chaotic sounding production. I definitely feel like the guitar cuts through more on this record. I also feel like some of these songs are amongst the most expansive IDLES have produced this far, especially when you take into account the extra sound effects to assist War, as well as the piano intro on Kill Them With Kindness. Also, I'm certainly no expert when it comes to guitar equipment, but it definitely feels like they were experimenting with guitar effects and noises here more so than on the other two records. But finally, before I conclude, I want to address the reaction to this album so far. Firstly, I kinda hate doing this because it will date the review somewhat, and these complaints could be non-existent in a year down the line, but I do find the reaction interesting, so I kinda want to do it anyway. The two major complaints I keep hearing about this record is that the lyrics are too simple and sloganeering, and that the record is too monotone. I personally find the complaint about the lyrics almost laughable because I hear it a lot from people who liked Joy as an act of resistance, and what I think is happening here just a little bit is that I think Joy was so well received critically that it's been built up into this perfect memory in a lot of people's heads. But as someone who's been a fan from the debut, I can tell you with confidence these exact complaints were leveled at Joy as well, citing lyrics like "fear leads to panic, panic leads to pain, pain leads to anger, anger leads to hate," or the verses in Samaritans. But the truth is, with the exception of Brutalism, I think the lyrics have basically always been simplistic, but it's Joe's passion that makes them so great. Also, I broadly think we're underselling lyrics like "you won't catch me staring at the sun." Yes, it's simple, but I personally think there is a cleverness in how much it conveys with so little. You also have to remember that Joy, while being excellent, wasn't a perfect record. I don't think many people would pick Cry to Me or Glam Rock over a large portion of the tracks on Ultramono. As for the second complaint about this album being too monotone, I can understand this one more because I do think that the middle run of 3 tracks, plus the more brittle production, gives this impression, but shockingly, I would actually say I think this is the most dynamic of the IDLES records. Ultimately, Brutalism is the monotone IDLES record. Not only does the production being so punchy and direct give every climax a similar feel, but also the majority of the songs are a similar pace and layer sounds in a very similar way. This did change on Joy as it had a variety of different grooves, plus it indulged in a more joyous tone, allowing for some of the tracks like Grey or I'm Scum to have a more playful tone which juxtaposed the more serious moments like Samaritans or Colossus pretty well. But even still, this record mostly contained straight played guitar, drums and bass. Ultramono, by comparison, has guitars on War sounding more brittle and cutting than ever. Guitar licks opening Donkey and Ground almost sound math rock inspired. The swelling guitar feedback complementing the grinding bass on Reigns. The raw, slightly reverbed quality on Mr. Motivator giving that song one hell of a drive. And I strongly believe if Grounds, Donkey, Reigns or War were put on either of the other 2 albums, they would have been singled out as one of the more unique unique spots on those albums. Having said all that though, I do have a couple of issues with Ultramono. First and most obviously, I do think that run in the middle is pretty lackluster, especially all grouped up in the way they are. I feel like Ultramono also suffers a tiny bit from being just another IDLES record. And finally, I do miss some of the snarkier and slightly more sarcastic lyrics. But regardless, I think the band are sounding better than ever in terms of giving tight performances. I think the production, while very full on, has allowed for a greater range of sounds while simultaneously feeling rawer and more aggressive. Plus, these songs are absolutely worthy of the high standard the band has set for themselves. To be honest, I actually think this is my favourite IDLES record so far. Needless to say, I am absolutely loving the hell out of this project, and every time I hear it grows on me just a tiny bit more. I'm feeling a 9 out of 10 on this one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. If you've heard the record, definitely let me know what you think about it, and I'll hopefully see you in another video.